The eyes open in the morning, and almost immediately, the effort begins. It is a quiet decision made in the dark. Today there will be patience. Today there will be no sharp words. Today things will be handled correctly. It sounds so simple. Just a normal morning, deciding to be a decent person. But watch what happens the moment the feet hit the floor. Notice the invisible weight that settles on the shoulders. It takes energy to build that version of the self. It takes an immense, hidden exertion just to prepare for the day. Someone asks a question. A completely normal, harmless question, but inside, a tiny spark of irritation flares up. It is completely unreasonable, yet it is there. So the chest tightens. The breath is controlled. A gentle smile is forced onto the face. And the correct, polite answer is given. Nothing happened on the outside, but on the inside. A small amount of energy was burned. It is the labor of pretending. The quiet, exhausting labor of being good. There is a voice inside that constantly justifies everything. It carefully explains why the frustration is valid. It whispers about how hard the effort is. It builds a quiet case for being the victim of the situation. Why does it constantly feel like a defense must be prepared? What makes this quiet internal complaining feel so necessary? There is a part of the mind that refuses to accept any responsibility. It always points the finger outward. It says the exhaustion is caused by the world. It says the world is too heavy, too demanding, too flawed. But what if the exhaustion is not coming from the world? Imagine a fire burning inside a closed room. The heat has nowhere to go. Every time a harsh reaction is swallowed, the temperature rises. Every time a smile is faked, the pressure builds. It is not peace. It is just containment. And containment takes an incredible amount of strength. It requires constant vigilance, constant suppression. This is why the end of the day feels like a collapse. Not because the physical body did so much work, but because the mind spent 12 hours wrestling with itself. 12 hours of keeping the actual thoughts locked away. There is a deep refusal to just look at what is actually there. It is too painful to see the impurity. It is too painful to admit that the anger is real, that the resentment is real. So instead of looking at it, it gets covered up, covered in politeness, covered in good intentions. But covering something does not make it disappear. It just forces it to work in the dark. The daily struggle to be good is exhausting because it is a war against reality. A war against what is actually living inside the heart. There is a desire to be calm, but there is no calm there. There is a frantic, anxious, desperate need to be seen as good, to be respected, to be comfortable. The longing for security drives every interaction. The fear of being disliked dictates every polite nod. It is a heavy, heavy chain to wear, dragging it through the office, dragging it through the kitchen, and all the while, the mind complains about how tired it is, asking why the world cannot just be easier, asking for circumstances to change, hoping that if the people around would just behave, the exhaustion would stop. There is a persistent fantasy that peace is just one changed circumstance away. If only the job was different, if only the house was quieter, if only that one specific person would stop talking. But notice what happens when the room is finally empty, when all the difficult people are gone. The exhaustion does not leave. The tight coil in the chest does not unwind, because the conflict was never really with them. The conflict was with the effort of holding the self together. It is a fragile structure, built out of habits, out of pride, out of the need to be right, and the slightest breeze threatens to knock it down. So there is a constant need to stand there, holding the walls up all day long. No wonder the bones ache. No wonder the eyes feel heavy. Watch the hands. Notice how they grip the steering wheel. Notice the jaw. clenched tight while looking at a screen. The body is absorbing the shockwaves of an invisible battle. Every suppressed sigh, every bitten lip, it is a constant breaking down and heating up. A slow, grinding friction. And it all comes from refusing to accept what is. Refusing to submit to the reality of the moment. There is a quiet arrogance in this struggle. A demand that the world should conform to a certain idea of goodness. And when it does not, the mind acts offended. It acts like an innocent victim trapped in a harsh place. But the harshness is self-created. It is the friction between how things are and how desperately they are wanted to be different. To be truly good would require no effort at all. It would just flow. But this performance, this is not goodness. It is just damage control. It is just managing the symptoms of a deeper sickness. And deep down, this is known. There is a quiet, uncomfortable knowing. A knowing that the polite smile is a lie. A knowing that the patient nod is hollow. It is terrifying to look closely at that hollowness. To see the sheer amount of impurity hiding behind the good deeds, so the eyes are kept closed. The attention is kept on the surface, on the tasks, on the schedule, on the physical tiredness. Anything to avoid looking into the dark basement of the mind, because looking there means admitting defeat. It means admitting that the daily struggle is failing. The mind constantly searches for a new method to feel better. A new routine, a new diet, a new way to organize the day. Trying to arrange the outside world so perfectly that the inside world stops hurting. But the inside world is the very thing generating the pain. It is like trying to cool down a furnace by painting the outside of it blue. The fire is still raging inside. The elements of frustration, of envy, of pride, they do not sleep. And the only tool used against them is a heavy, exhausted suppression. Pushing them down, forcing them into the corners. Eventually, the pressure becomes too much. A small crack appears. A sharp word slips out. A sudden, disproportionate burst of anger over a dropped spoon or a delayed email. And then comes the guilt. The crushing, familiar guilt. The voice returns, demanding more effort tomorrow. Demanding a stronger grip on the behavior. And so the cycle prepares to repeat itself. The alarm is set. The intention is renewed. The heavy machinery of pretending is oiled and ready for another shift. It is a tragic, endless loop. Think about the energy it takes to listen to a conversation that holds no real interest. The effort to nod at the exact right moments. The subtle tension in the neck. The eyes trying to convey a warmth that is not actually there. Why does this performance feel so mandatory? What makes this forced engagement seem like the only option? What would happen if the face just relaxed? There is a terror in that idea. A fear that if the real feelings were shown, everything would fall apart. The relationships, the reputation, the entire carefully constructed life, so the burden is picked up again. The smile is reapplied, and the body continues to carry the weight of 1,000 small lies. Lies told not to deceive others maliciously, but just to survive the day. Lies told to avoid conflict. Lies told to keep the surface smooth. But the surface is the only thing that is smooth. Beneath it, everything is churning. This is the hidden hardship. This is the pain that no one talks about at the dinner table. Everyone is sitting there, chewing their food, holding up their own heavy walls, looking at each other through tiny, guarded windows. Everyone exhausted. Everyone wondering why life feels so incredibly draining. And yet, there is a strange comfort in the exhaustion. It feels like proof of hard work. Why does it seem to prove that the effort is real? What makes this suffering feel like a badge of honor? But the caring is often just disguised anxiety. A desperate attempt to control how things unfold. The struggle to be good is mostly a struggle for control. Trying to control the environment. trying to control the reactions of others, trying to control the uncontrollable waves of the mind. It is like trying to hold the ocean back with a pair of bare hands. Of course the arms are shaking. Of course the spirit is worn thin. The refusal to just let the waves crash is what causes the agony. The refusal to admit powerlessness. There is a profound stubbornness in the daily routine. A stubborn belief that enough willpower can solve the human condition, if only the rules are followed strictly enough. If only the habits are tracked perfectly enough. But the ledger never balances. There is always a debt. There is always a failure. It is incredibly painful to look at this cycle without turning away. To see the sheer futility of it. To realize that years have been spent polishing an exterior that means nothing, while the interior remains exactly as restless as it was a decade ago. The same triggers still cause the same internal spikes of heat. The same fears still dictate the same compromises. The same old weight is still sitting in the chest, heavy and dull. Nothing has actually transformed. It has merely been dressed up in nicer clothes. And it takes a massive amount of energy to keep those clothes clean. Watch the evening routine. The quiet moments before sleep. The body finally stops moving. The room is dark, and the mind, finally untethered from the tasks of the day, begins its review, playing back the conversations, analyzing the perceived mistakes, calculating the effort required for tomorrow. Even in rest, there is no real rest. Even in silence, there is a frantic preparation. The armor is being patched up. The weapons of politeness are being sharpened because tomorrow the performance must resume. The daily struggle to be good cannot take a day off. If it stops, what is left? What remains when the effort to be good is completely abandoned? There is a deep fear of finding out. A fear that underneath the exhaustion, there is something entirely unacceptable, something raw, something dark. So the choice is made again in the quiet of the night. The choice to keep carrying the weight. The choice to keep fighting the invisible battle. To keep painting over the rust, because the alternative seems too terrifying to bear. Because letting the mask drop feels like a kind of death, and nobody wants to let the old self die. There is just a desire to be comfortable. But comfort is the one thing the struggle will never provide. Only an endless, wearying tension. Only the heavy sigh in the morning, and the quiet, exhausted collapse at night. The head finally rests on the pillow. The heavy sigh escapes into the dark room. There is an expectation that sleep will just arrive. But beneath the exhaustion, there is a low, persistent hum. The body is not completely quiet. There is a motor still running somewhere deep inside. It is the raw, undeniable machinery of being a physical creature. A profound, ancient heat that pays no attention to the schedule for tomorrow. Watch what happens when the rational mind tries to shut it down. The mind says it is time to rest, but the body has its own completely separate gravity. It demands something else. There is a sudden restlessness in the limbs. A craving for friction, for intensity, for release. Why does that physical drive create so many secret problems? What makes this natural biological force feel so difficult to manage? During the daylight, this heat is carefully disguised. It is dressed up in professional clothes and sat at a desk. It is forced to participate in polite conversations about the weather. But a furnace does not care about politeness. A furnace only knows how to burn. And there is a fire burning inside every single person sitting in that room. It is the energy that builds cities and creates life. An immense, kinetic power sitting right there beneath the surface of the skin. Yet, society demands that everyone pretend it is not there. So it gets pushed down into the basement of the psyche. And when a fire is locked in the dark, it does not go out. It just finds a different way to consume the oxygen. Notice the subtle, unspoken tension when a stranger walks past. The eyes are pulled almost magnetically for just a fraction of a second. It is not a conscious choice. It is the sudden flare of a very old wiring system. A quick calculation of attraction, of possibility, of hunger. And then immediately the mask is pulled back up. The glance is directed back to the sidewalk. The breathing is leveled out. Nothing happened on the outside, but on the inside, a quiet complication was just added to the day. These tiny, invisible moments accumulate. They build a secret, parallel life that runs right alongside the public one. It is a life made entirely of suppressed urges, of thoughts that can absolutely never be spoken aloud at the dinner table. Why does it feel so dangerous to just acknowledge the heat? What makes the mind so terrified of the body? There is a deep fear of losing control, and knowing that if the grip is loosened even slightly, the fire might consume everything. So the control becomes rigid. The physical drive is labeled as an enemy, as something impure or primitive, but denying the drive does not weaken it. It only scatters the energy. Instead of one clear, powerful force, it breaks into a dozen anxious habits. It becomes the nervous tapping of a foot. It becomes the sudden, unexplainable urge to consume entirely too much food, or the desire to drink until the edges of reality get blurry. The energy is desperately trying to find a way out of the pressure cooker. It is searching for any available exit. Look at the screen glowing in the dark room late at night. The endless scrolling through images of other people. The quiet, private pursuit of a quick hit of pleasure. A digital substitute for a real, terrifying connection. There is a brief spark of satisfaction. A momentary release of the built-up tension, but pay close attention to what follows. Notice the heavy, hollow feeling that arrives almost immediately after. The heat dissipates, but it leaves behind an aftertaste of ash. The secret problem was not solved, it was just temporarily sedated, and the machinery resets. The tank begins to fill up again. This cycle happens behind closed doors, completely hidden from the neighbors. A private war fought in the absolute quiet of an ordinary evening. The shame surrounding this cycle is incredibly dense. A quiet, crushing weight carried right behind the ribs. There is a persistent belief that everyone else has figured this out. That other people are not struggling with this relentless physical motor. That other people are clean and calm and composed inside. But the truth is, the same furnace burns in every single house on the street. The same secret compromises are being made. The same guilt is being washed away in the morning shower. Why does it seem like this energy always leads to regret? Why does it feel like a trap? Because the energy is being spent entirely on the surface. It is being thrown away on things that do not actually nourish anything deep. Imagine possessing a powerful, heavy engine, and using it only to spin the wheels in the mud. There is a lot of noise. There is a lot of smoke, but there is absolutely no forward movement. The soul remains exactly where it was, just a little more tired. The physical drive is a raw material. It is fundamentally neutral. It is neither good nor evil. It is simply fuel, but when it is handled with fear or used entirely for temporary distraction, it turns toxic. It creates tangles. It attaches itself to strange things and hardens the heart. Like pouring molten metal into a crooked mold, it cools down and takes the shape of the crookedness. This is how simple situations become hopelessly complicated. A casual friendship suddenly feels heavy with unspoken expectations. A working environment becomes a minefield of subtle rivalries and hidden attractions. The energy leaks out and stains everything it touches. It ruins the peace of the present moment, because the physical drive is always demanding something more. It is always whispering that this moment is not enough, that there is a better sensation to be had somewhere else. It pulls the attention away from the real life happening right here and drags it into a fantasy of what could be. A fantasy of endless pleasure, endless comfort, endless validation. But fantasies are incredibly demanding guests. They require constant feeding, constant attention, and they give absolutely nothing solid in return, only a deeper ache, only a more profound sense of lack. Notice how the physical drive operates like an addict. It is never satisfied for long. The threshold for what brings relief just keeps getting higher. What worked last year does not work today. The craving becomes sharper. The search becomes more desperate, and the secrets become a little bit darker. The lengths taken to hide the hunger become more elaborate. Why does it take so much effort to maintain the illusion of innocence? What makes the reality of the human animal so unacceptable? There is a terror of being seen as out of control. A terror of the primitive forces that live in the lower half of the body, so the brain acts like a strict manager, constantly trying to negotiate with a wild animal trying to civilize the heat, trying to turn a roaring fire into a small decorative candle. But the animal cannot be reasoned with. It does not understand logic, it only understands pressure and release, and so the internal split deepens, the rational mind judging the physical body, the body resenting the rational mind, living in a state of permanent, quiet hostility. This is the source of the profound tightness in the jaw, the reason the stomach feels knotted even on a beautiful day. The body is absorbing the shock of holding two completely opposed forces. The desperate desire to look good and the desperate desire to just let go. When the tension becomes too high, something has to break. A sudden, irrational argument starts over absolutely nothing. A destructive choice is made, completely out of character, just to shatter the pristine, suffocating glass of the daily routine. There is a strange, dark thrill in that destruction. A brief moment of feeling violently, undeniably alive. But the cost is always too high. The damage has to be cleaned up the next morning, and the guilt is added to the pile. The apologies are made, the mask is put back on, slightly heavier than before. And the motor goes right back to humming in the dark. It is an exhausting way to navigate through time. Carrying a tremendous power source, but having no idea how to use it safely, treating the most profound energy in nature as if it were a dirty secret, something to be managed, something to be hidden away. What would happen if the relationship to that heat changed? What if the fire was not an enemy? There is a very uncomfortable realization waiting right behind the shame. The realization that the pain is not coming from the drive itself. The pain is coming from the incredibly poor way it is being handled. The friction of constantly trying to suppress it, or thoughtlessly throwing it away. It is like standing under a waterfall and complaining about drowning, while refusing to just cup the hands and drink. The sheer volume of the energy is overwhelming. It was meant to be used for something massive, something deeply transformative, but it is being used to fuel petty arguments and midnight scrolling. Of course, there is a profound sense of frustration. The system knows it is operating far below its actual capacity. The internal architecture feels the misuse of the fuel. A high-performance engine being forced to idle in heavy traffic, it starts to rattle. It starts to overheat. This is the hidden source of so much modern anxiety. Restless energy of a power that has nowhere productive to go. It turns inward and starts to eat the wiring. It creates imaginary problems just to have something to chew on. Notice how the mind will invent a crisis just to feel the adrenaline, just to give the internal heat a place to vent, the sudden obsession with a minor slight, the endless rehearsal of a conversation that never even happened. All of it is just the raw energy looking for an outlet. A ghost, haunting its own house because it has forgotten how to leave. There is no avoiding the furnace. The fire will burn until the very last breath. The only actual choice is what to put inside the oven. What will this intense, inescapable heat be used to forge? Right now, it is mostly forging chains. A persistent, heavy anchor of undisclosed regrets, and the weight of those secrets dictates the posture. The slight slump of the shoulders, the hesitation before speaking the truth, because speaking the truth might accidentally reveal the hidden things, so the conversations remain shallow. The connections remain safe and slightly distant, because true intimacy requires bringing the whole self to the table. And nobody wants to bring the basement to the table. Nobody wants to show the hunger. Nobody wants to admit how desperately the body wants to consume and be consumed. So everyone stays a little bit lonely, even in crowded rooms, even in warm beds. A quiet isolation built entirely out of the fear of being seen as an animal. But the animal is there, it is breathing right now. It is waiting. Why does that physical drive create so many secret problems? Because it has been told it is a problem, because it has never been offered a higher purpose. It has only been offered suppression or cheap indulgence, and both of those paths lead to a very specific kind of rot, a slow deterioration of the vital force. Look closely at the feeling of emptiness that follows the cheap indulgence. It is not just a biological chemical drop. It is a profound spiritual fatigue. A quiet voice saying, this is not what this fire was built for. The energy knows its own value, and it creates suffering when it is treated as something worthless. It demands to be respected. It demands to be handled with extreme care and massive attention. But attention is the one thing rarely given to the fire. Usually, there is only an attempt to run away from it, or rush blindly into it. No stillness, no observation, just the frantic swinging of a pendulum from extreme restriction to sudden collapse, and back again. The body is thrown violently between fasting and feasting, never finding the quiet, steady temperature where actual transformation happens, where the raw material stops creating secret messes and starts creating something incredibly strong and clear. But finding that steady heat requires looking directly at the raw material, and that is a terrifying gaze. It means looking at the pure, unvarnished lust, looking at the sheer, greedy desire to possess, looking at it without instantly throwing a blanket of shame over it. Just watching the machinery work, watching the heat rise, watching the mind scramble to find a way to distract itself. It takes immense courage to just sit in the room with the fire, to let it burn without immediately trying to put it out or let it loose. This is the silent work that nobody sees. The internal pressure cooker that eventually changes the shape of the metal. But until that capacity is built, the leaks will continue. The secret problems will keep appearing like damp patches on a wall, and the physical body will continue to feel like a burden, a heavy, demanding object that constantly needs to be managed, an uninvited guest that refuses to leave the house. Eating all the food, making all the noise, causing an endless series of quiet, exhausting emergencies, while the mind continues to wonder why life cannot just be peaceful, why the effort to simply exist feels so incredibly draining. The body carries all of that hidden, restless energy out the front door. It walks out into the morning, completely loaded with invisible tension, and almost immediately, it encounters the outside world. It encounters the other people who are carrying their own hidden fires. Most interactions are simple enough to manage. A polite nod, a brief exchange of words, but there is always that one specific person, the one who only has to enter the room to change the air pressure. It might be a co-worker with a particular edge in their voice. It might be a family member who always asks the same perfectly designed, passive-aggressive question, Notice the immediate involuntary physical response when they appear. The stomach tightens. The breath becomes suddenly shallow. A defensive wall slams into place before a single word has even been spoken. Why does that annoying person always know exactly how to push the right buttons? Why does a completely ordinary comment from them feel like a physical strike? It is never a massive betrayal. It is usually something incredibly small. A harmless sounding suggestion about the schedule. A tiny critique about how a task was handled, but the internal reaction is entirely out of proportion. A massive flare of heat surges up into the chest and the face. The mind instantly begins drafting a furious defense. It starts compiling a list of every wrong thing that person has ever done. The immediate reflex is a deep mechanical resentment, a desperate urge to retaliate, even if it is just in the silence of the mind, or perhaps the reaction leaks out into the hallway. Finding someone else in the office to quietly complain to, building a small, secret alliance of irritation, talking behind their back to validate the anger. There is a profound, almost addictive comfort in this routine. The mind spins a very convincing story where it is completely innocent. It firmly believes it is simply a victim of this unbearable individual. It whispers that if this person were just different, everything would be fine. There is a constant, exhausting demand for the circumstances to change. A persistent fantasy that peace is just one resignation letter or one moved desk away. If only they would stop talking. If only they were transferred to another department. But pay very close attention to the button itself. A button can only be pressed if it is already installed in the machinery. The annoying person did not put the anger there. They did not install the deep, fragile pride. They did not create the hidden insecurity. They merely walked up and pressed exactly where the system was already wired to explode. They just touched the bruise that was already hiding under the shirt. This is why the frustration is so intensely painful. It is not just annoyance at their behavior. It is a sudden, blinding collision with the hidden, unresolved ego. It is the sudden exposure of something dark and reactive that was supposed to stay hidden. The mind desperately wants to push this person away. It wants to label them as the enemy and dismiss them completely. But what if this difficult, incredibly frustrating individual is actually providing a profound service? What if they are holding the exact key required for any real relief? Look at the mechanics of the situation. Life is full of complicated patterns and unseen forces, and it orchestrates these precise, irritating collisions perfectly, putting these exact individuals in the path, day after day. It is not an accident. It is a deliberate exposure. They are pointing directly at the hidden pride. They are dragging the buried resentment out into the harsh daylight. They are standing there, being completely annoying, acting as a flawless mirror, reflecting back the exact internal mess that the mind refuses to look at. It is an incredibly uncomfortable favor, and the mind absolutely hates it. It hates being shown its own impurity. It despises the one holding the mirror, because looking in that mirror means admitting that the problem is internal. It means acknowledging that the suffering is self-generated. So the mechanical defensive reaction takes over again and again. The wall goes up. The petty revenge is plotted. The opportunity is completely wasted. The heat of the interaction is just burned off in pointless complaining. And because the lesson was rejected, the cycle must repeat. The universe is incredibly patient. If the situation is avoided by changing jobs or leaving the room, the pattern just follows along. The face of the annoying person changes, but the dynamic remains identical, because the root cause is still sitting quietly in the center of the chest. The button is still waiting to be pushed. There is a constant, desperate prayer for an easy life, a wish for a perfectly peaceful environment, surrounded only by agreeable, supportive people, But imagine if that wish was actually granted. Imagine a world with absolutely no friction. If every demand was met, if every difficult person was instantly removed, the internal rot would just continue undisturbed. The hidden pride would simply calcify and harden. The capacity for real compassion would never be tested, and so it would completely wither away. An effortlessly comfortable life would not bring liberation. It would only bring a deeper, heavier kind of sleep. A total stagnation of the spirit. Chant requires intense heat, and this deeply frustrating person is supplying the necessary friction. They are the heat being applied directly to the cold, rigid metal of the personality. They are bringing the exact energy needed to burn away the dead wood. But it requires a completely radical shift in perspective to use that heat. It requires stopping the mechanical reaction right in the middle of the sentence. Imagine what would happen in that moment of collision. The annoying comment is spoken. The familiar, sickening drop in the stomach happens. The internal fire flares up, demanding to be let out, but instead of speaking, there is just observation. Instead of defending the pride, there is just a quiet watching of the pride burning, feeling the intense, uncomfortable heat of the offense. Watching the mind scramble frantically to protect its fragile image, not acting on the anger. Just watching the heavy, ugly machinery of the ego grind and smoke. What if that deeply annoying person was viewed with a strange kind of secret gratitude, knowing that without their irritating behavior, the hidden sickness would never be seen? They are performing a task that no one else is willing to do. They are showing exactly what needs to be dismantled. It is agonizing to accept this reality. It feels incredibly unfair. It feels like losing the argument. The mind violently resists the idea of being grateful for unjust criticisms. It wants to be right. It is addicted to being right, but defending that rightness has never brought a single moment of genuine, lasting peace. It has only created a life of constant vigilance and exhaustion. It takes an immense, almost terrifying courage to drop the defense, to let the annoying person push the button and simply watch the explosion happen internally, without throwing the shrapnel back at them. There is a profound vulnerability in just letting the pride be wounded, in letting the false image of the self take a hit. Because when the pride is finally allowed to burn without defense, it starts to turn to ash. The button slowly loses its wiring. The next time the person makes the same comment, the heat is a little less intense. The physical reaction is a little slower, not because they changed. They are still exactly as annoying as they were yesterday, but the internal structure has shifted. The thing they were pushing against is no longer entirely solid. This is the agonizing, invisible labor of real transformation. It happens in the most mundane, frustrating places imaginable. It happens in the break room. It happens while reading a 2-line email that ruins the morning. These are the actual proving grounds. These deeply irritating moments are the exact materials required for the work. The raw, unpleasant manifestations of other people are the fuel. When the complaining stops, the energy changes. Instead of leaking out into the world as bitterness, it turns inward. It becomes a steady, quiet pressure. A pressure that slowly crushes the illusions. It is a lonely process. No one else can see the restraint being exercised. They just see someone standing quietly while being criticized. They might even think it is a sign of weakness. But the strength required to not react is massive. It takes far more power to contain the explosion than it does to just let it detonate. And in that containment, something entirely new begins to form. A space opens up where the automatic reaction used to be. A strange, quiet clarity begins to filter into the mind. The realization that the other person is also just running on their own automatic, painful machinery. They are also trapped in their own reactions. Bon, Their annoying behavior is just the symptom of their own hidden heat. When the button inside is no longer controlling the response, the other person ceases to be a threat. They just become another human being, struggling with their own heavy armor. But getting to that quiet space requires walking directly through the fire of the offense. It requires feeling the absolute worst of the internal ugliness first. It requires looking at the profound arrogance of the self. The deep-seated belief that the world should always be polite and accommodating, that arrogance is the source of the suffering, not the person across the table. The person across the table is merely the alarm clock ringing in a dark room. And the mind is incredibly angry at being woken up. It wants to smash the clock and go back to sleep. It wants to preserve the comfortable illusion that it is already a good, patient person. But the truth is in the reaction. The truth is in the tight jaw and the racing heart. That is the actual reality of the internal condition, and it cannot be fixed until it is fully acknowledged. So the annoying person remains. Life keeps placing them right in the center of the path, day after day, interaction after interaction, until the lesson is finally absorbed, until the defense is finally dropped, and the realization dawns that the outside world is only a reflection. A perfectly designed, incredibly painful reflection of exactly what is broken inside. It is a brutal, beautiful mechanism. Exacting and entirely unsympathetic to the complaints of the ego, it just keeps providing exactly what is necessary, over and over again, until the pain of holding on to the pride finally becomes greater than the fear of letting it go. The argument with the annoying person finally ends, the door closes, and the room is quiet again. There is a deep, exhausted breath. The body slumps into a chair, completely drained by the invisible effort of the last 10 minutes, and almost instantly the mind begins to build a raft. A familiar, comforting raft made entirely of daydreams. The attention drifts away from the heavy, uncomfortable present moment. It floats toward the favorite, most deeply guarded fantasy, the fantasy of the perfectly easy life, the dream of the absolute escape. It plays out like a silent movie behind the eyes. A house somewhere far away, surrounded by trees. A morning with absolutely no alarms. A schedule with completely empty pages. No demanding emails, no difficult emergencies. Just a vast, undisturbed, perfectly controlled silence. There is a profound longing for this imaginary place. A desperate belief that if the environment was finally peaceful, the inside of the head would be peaceful too. It is the belief that changing the external circumstances will automatically fix the internal exhaustion. That moving to a new city or winning the lottery would permanently solve the human condition. Why does it seem like having a perfectly easy life would actually make things worse? What makes this beautiful, harmless daydream so secretly dangerous? Imagine for a moment that the wish is entirely granted. Imagine that tomorrow every single obstacle is permanently removed from the path. Unlimited resources are suddenly available. Every difficult person is quietly escorted out of the daily routine. There is no more friction. No one ever criticizes the work. No one ever misunderstands a sentence. The temperature of the room is always exactly right. Every meal is perfect. Every desire is immediately fulfilled. At first it feels like paradise. The shoulders finally drop. The jaw unclenches. But watch what happens after a few weeks in the perfectly easy life. The external world has stopped applying pressure, but the internal engine is still running at full speed. The same restless energy is still sitting in the chest. The same quiet anxieties are still waiting in the dark. Only now, there is nothing real to distract them. There is no daily struggle to absorb the shock waves. So the mind begins to manufacture its own problems. It starts to obsess over incredibly tiny, insignificant details. A slight delay in a delivery becomes a massive, intolerable insult. A microscopic flaw in a piece of furniture ruins the entire day. Without heavy friction, the tolerance for discomfort completely atrophies. The skin becomes incredibly thin. The slightest breeze of inconvenience feels like a violent storm. Because the capacity to endure has never been exercised, it simply wastes away. An effortless life does not create a strong, peaceful spirit. It creates an incredibly fragile, demanding tyrant. If a completely peaceful, perfectly comfortable life was simply handed over, the hidden sickness inside would not disappear. It would actually become much worse. The pride would never be challenged, so it would quietly solidify into absolute arrogance. The impatience would never be tested, so it would harden into a permanent, snapping reflex. The deep, quiet rot of the ego would continue completely undisturbed. Like a piece of metal sitting in a perfectly still, climate-controlled room, it does not become pure just because it is comfortable. It just sits there, slowly gathering dust, never changing its shape. This is the terror of the easy life. It is not liberation. It is just a very deep, very pleasant stagnation. There is a reason the daily routine feels so heavy. There is a reason it is filled with so much deeply irritating friction. The exact frustrating circumstances happening right now are not a mistake. They are not a punishment, and they are not an accident. They are the precise laboratory conditions required to force a change. They provide the exact amount of heat and pressure needed to break down the impurities. Without that intense heat, nothing ever transforms. Without the heavy pressure, the solid, stubborn habits of the personality will never crack. The mind constantly begs for the heat to be turned down. It prays for the difficult coworker to leave, or for the financial stress to vanish. It says, if only I had this specific thing, I could finally be good. If only my life looked like that, I would finally be at peace. But trying to arrange the furniture of the outside world to find peace is a completely futile game. It is an endless, exhausting negotiation with a mirror, because the true cause of the suffering is not out there in the world. The root cause is entirely inside. It is the hidden pride, the hidden envy, the hidden, desperate need to be comfortable. And those hidden things can only be exposed through conflict. They can only be dragged out into the light by the very things the mind hates the most. By the delays, by the insults, by the sheer, exhausting unreasonableness of other human beings. Every time a plan falls apart, a tiny fire is lit inside. Every time someone speaks harshly, the temperature in the chest rises. The immediate reaction is to complain, to verbally attack the situation, or to silently curse the universe for being so difficult. But all of that complaining is just a massive waste of energy. It is taking the exact fuel needed for transformation and throwing it out the window. What if the frustrating moment was not an interruption of life? What if the frustrating moment was the actual material of life? Imagine receiving the bad news or the unfair criticism and simply stopping. Not immediately launching into a frantic defense. Not running away into a daydream of a better place. Just standing there, perfectly still, inside the heat of the moment, feeling the pressure of the disappointment crushing against the ribs. Watching the ego writhe and scream in pain because it did not get what it wanted. There is an intense, purifying fire in that exact moment. It is the feeling of the old, fragile self actually breaking down. When the suffering suddenly intensifies, it feels like everything is going wrong. But the intensification of the pain is often the very process of the purification working. The heat is accelerating the decay of the false image. It is burning away the dead wood that has been carried around for decades. It is agonizing. There is absolutely nothing pleasant about it, but it is the only way the heavy, dense lead of the ordinary mind can be changed into something clear and valuable. The transformation cannot happen on a beach. It cannot happen in a perfectly quiet cabin in the woods. It happens right here, in the middle of the crowded grocery store. It happens in the terrible, awkward silence of a failing relationship. It happens while staring at a bank account that does not have enough numbers in it. These deeply uncomfortable places are the actual testing grounds. They are the places where the real, invisible labor is performed, but the mind is incredibly stubborn. It refuses to accept the laboratory. It constantly rejects the exact tools that are being handed to it. It points at the broken circumstance and says, "No, not this one. Give me an easier one. Give me a challenge that looks heroic. Do not give me this petty, humiliating, boring struggle." There is a profound lack of gratitude for the reality of the present moment. A constant, quiet rejection of the way things actually are. And that rejection is what makes the pain so unbearable. The refusal to just let the situation be what it is. The refusal to let the annoying person be exactly as annoying as they are. The demand that the universe should bend to the comfort of one single individual. If that demand was dropped, the entire physical experience would shift. The heavy, exhausting weight of trying to control the world would instantly vanish. The difficult co-worker would no longer be a villain. They would just be a part of the necessary friction. They would be recognized as a deeply uncomfortable, completely essential favor, pushing the exact buttons needed to show where the internal wiring is still broken. There is a strange, unsettling peace in this realization, a quiet surrender to the heavy machinery of daily life, knowing that the delays, the arguments, and the sudden losses are all perfectly designed. Dots. They are carefully orchestrated collisions, meant to force the eyes open. Without them, the eyes would remain shut forever. The mind would simply dream its way to the grave, wrapped in soft blankets, surrounded by perfectly agreeable people, never once feeling the intense, terrifying heat of actual change, never once realizing the sheer, magnificent power hidden beneath the surface of the skin. The easy life is a beautiful, deeply convincing trap. It sells the illusion that if the body is rested, the soul will be at peace. But the soul does not care about comfort. The soul only cares about becoming real. And becoming real requires an unbelievable amount of friction. It requires the willingness to be shaped by the sharp edges of the world, to let the unfairness and the petty frustrations act like a chisel against the stone of the heart, striking the same spot over and over again, day after day, until finally the hard, protective shell cracks open and something entirely new is allowed to breathe. But the chisel hurts. The chisel is incredibly annoying, so the mind continues to pack its imaginary bags. It continues to look out the window, dreaming of the empty house in the woods, hoping that one day the universe will make a mistake and just hand over the easy life, hoping to bypass the fire entirely. But the fire is the only way through. The heat of the ordinary, frustrating, deeply imperfect day is the only thing that actually works. Every attempt to escape it just resets the clock. Every daydream just prolongs the exact same internal tension. The friction is waiting right here, exactly where the feet are currently standing. It is asking to be felt. It is asking to be used. Why does it seem like having a perfectly easy life would actually make things worse? Because an easy life leaves the self completely intact, and the self is the very thing that is causing all the pain.